So, very warm good morning to the August gathering for the special lecture arranged on the topic of design of experiments. I extend my warm welcome to the Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor R. Velraj, our Chief Guest of Eminence, Professor Bir Mohamed, and the Director, Center for Research, Professor Umarani Ma'am, and my dear colleagues at Center for Research. I extend my warm welcome to all the research scholars, full-time, part-time research scholars. On behalf of Center for Research, so I extend my welcome to all the participants and research scholars to join this special lecture on design of experiments. I extend my sincere thanks to the Honorable Vice Chancellor for organizing this lecture. So on behalf of our Vice Chancellor direction, the Center for Research taken this step to conduct this special lecture. And I also extend my special thanks to Professor Bir Mohamed sir for accepting our invitation to deliver lecture on this very important topic, particularly for the benefit of our research scholars, Anna University research scholars. Now I invite our Honorable Vice Chancellor sir to felicitate the guest with a bouquet and a memento. Thank you, sir. Now I invite our Director Ma'am to felicitate our Honorable Vice Chancellor with a bouquet. Thank you, ma'am. Now I invite our Honorable Vice Chancellor sir to share a few words about the importance of research and the research activities of Center for Research, how it is very much useful for our university.
Very good morning. Respected Professor Bir Mohamed, Professor of Emeritus Anna University, Director Research Dr. Umarani, Additional Director Dr. Crescent, and all research scholars. It's a very good initiative by Director Research. In fact, last week, Professor Bir Mohamed and myself, we were discussing about some other topic, and casually he told he is going to take this design of experiments to 20 scholars of AC Tech. Then I thought that should be extended to all research scholars of Anna University. So immediately I requested a Director Research to initiate this for benefit of all these two research scholars of Anna University. This topic, design of experiments, it's a part of research methodology because all research scholars should know the power of design of experiments. Recently, we have included this research methodology as a part of ME curriculum, and also most of you would have studied either in the ME curriculum or PhD curriculum this design of experiments. Some basic requirements you would have studied, but this design of experiments is also a part of research methodology. Those students who are doing some extensive analysis with the experiments, they need to understand about this. But some scholars who are doing the survey analysis, their requirement is different. So like that, this research methodology itself, there are 3 different requirements after the preliminary requirement. This is one out of the 3, which is very useful for the people who are doing experiments and also handling lot of data. I know Professor Bir Mohamed since several years. He is the person, to my knowledge, who knows statistics in a very big way, very clearly one can explain to the students. Though he is not a mathematics professor, he can make it because with his application knowledge, he gained a lot of knowledge in the field of statistics. With that, In fact, we were discussing about some statistical requirement only that day. Then casually he told us as if he is going to discuss about this experimental design of experiments to few research scholars. Then it was now extended to all the research scholars. I also want to tell about Professor Peer Mohamed. He is one of the few persons in the university who made lot of changes in the system. That system is also the changes, those who are very sharp in data and sharp in doing the things, then those people only can make changes in a system level. To my knowledge, he is the major contributor to the system changes in this Anna University. I am very happy. Today he is going to share some of his thoughts on design of experiments to all the research scholars. Definitely, I am sure your level of thinking and your research output will increase. Definitely, I am sure, if you are contributing this 1.5 hours, whatever he is going to spend to you, you should be in a position to grasp whatever he is going to tell. Definitely, it will be very useful to enhance your research. Now, I request Dr. Peer Mohamed to deliver his lecture. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for your promising words. Before we begin the session, let me give you a brief introduction about the speaker for today's session. Professor Peer Mohamed received his BE and MTech degrees from PSG College of Technology and IIT Delhi respectively during 1980 and 1983. Sir earned his PhD degree from Anna University in the year 1992 for his notable research work on yarn spinning. Professor is an important asset to Anna University, as our Vice Chancellor sir pointed out. So he is an important asset to our university. So he joined Anna University as a teaching research associate in the year 1986 and rendered his invaluable services to this university in various capacities. He was a professor and a professor of eminence in the Department of Textile Technology, AC Tech Campus, Anna University. To mention a few of his commendable service to the university or Director, Center for Affiliations, Director, Center for Faculty Development, and also sir served as a Director for Planning and Development. Post his superannuation, Professor was with B.S. Abdur Rahman Crescent Institute of Science and Technology as Vice Chancellor. So Professor is specialized in yarn engineering, statistical applications in textile engineering, mechanics of textile structures. He holds several research accolades which includes funded projects, publication in reputed international journals, and also granted patents. Professor, we are very much delighted to listen to you, and you may please take over the stage, and I hope all the scholars will definitely enjoy our professor lecture. So this lecture is useful to fine-tune your research work. Thank you very much.
Good morning, all of you. Our respected Vice Chancellor, Director, the officers of Center for Research, faculty members, and my dear research scholars. So really, I am delighted to be among you to share my knowledge on statistics, which I gained over past 40 years, I would say that. When I was a student in IIT Delhi doing my MTech program, statistics was one of the subjects offered by the mathematics department. So I was given a complete fundamental knowledge about the statistics. So I realized the importance of the statistics in an application, particularly in textile industry. So when I was doing my PhD program, I applied the statistical knowledge, and I also used the design of experiments in 1980s actually. And that helped me in publishing my articles in the most reputed journals at that time. So again, I am visiting textile mills, giving my advices in the statistical process control also. So as our Vice Chancellor mentioned that the application of statistics varies actually. So for the research scholars, one kind of requirement, and for the industry, it's a different requirement. So now I used to confine my lecture only to the benefit of research scholars. So I was one of the research scholars some 30, 40 years back. So I know the difficulties faced by our research scholars. So mainly, those who are doing the experiments as explained by our Vice Chancellor, we require a lot of knowledge. Because whatever we conclude in the end, it should be reliable. So then only our research work will be respected. Not for the sake of earning the degree. We should contribute to the society and the industry. When our results are reliable, reproducible. Actually, when doing the experiments, there are a lot of sources for the error. Whether we know it or not, we ignore. So we get some results, interpret, send it, and publish, and get the degree. So it's okay from the academic point of view. But making our results useful to the society. So we have to be very, very careful in conducting the experiments. So from that point of view, I want to focus my lecture. Next slide, please. Okay. So the main objective is enabling the research scholars, particularly, with the design of experiment is to estimate the effect of the parameters we have identified. To study is hold on the response we want to study. Response means anything. It can be strength, it can be efficiency, or anything. Every student would be interested in knowing the input, the effect of input on the output. That I am giving it in the different words. Actually, the effect of the different parameters we might have identified to see its effect on the response. And while doing that, we have to minimize the error. So my focus will be mostly on minimizing the error. So because we can conduct the experiments, get the data and put them in any software applications, and it will give all the results you want, all the analysis you want. But the software does not ask question how reliable, reproducible your data are, isn't it? So we have to be very careful in getting the correct results, and then only our results will be reliable. So these are some of the basic books I'm referring, and I don't know how the research scholars, there are many number of books available for statistics, and for the experimental design I refer Montgomery. As I told you, when I was studying MTech, I referred the book Paul Mayer, the most fundamental book that gave me the fundamental knowledge about the statistics. And the another book is the advanced level book by Barry, so about modeling. So this knowledge on statistics, fundamental and advanced knowledge, and from the pure statistician is essential, then only we can apply them in the proper way. So, how statistics is different from other subjects? Actually, we all research scholars will be involved in studying one or more phenomena. Any area of research, it can be mechanical, civil, electrical, whatever it is, we'll be interested in analyzing a phenomena. And we want to relate the input versus the output. And overall, globally, you can classify the phenomena into two categories. One is deterministic, another is probabilistic. So in the deterministic phenomenon, and it is defined as when you repeat the measurements under identical condition, you will end up with the same result. That is the deterministic phenomenon. Opposed to that is the probabilistic phenomenon. When you repeat the experiment under identical condition, you will not get the same result. So that's a basic difference between deterministic phenomenon and the probabilistic phenomenon. So all the statistical study are related to the probabilistic phenomenon. So the example I have given, say if you want to find out the atomic weight of carbon, anytime if you find, isn't it, it will give the result 12. Anytime, isn't it? There will not be any change. And those who are related to chemistry, they might have done volumetric and gravimetric analysis. So in the volumetric analysis, some solution. In the volumetric analysis, some solution would be in the burette and another solution in the beaker. So what we will do, isn't it? We will add the solution from the burette to the beaker. At one point of time, we will stop, isn't it? What time? When the color changes, isn't it? And we will note the volume. And what will we do? We will repeat the experiment. Second, third. When we will stop the repetition? Any answer? When we get the concurrent value. When we get the concurrent value. What's the meaning of that? So it's only unique value. It is not that the average of many values. It's a unique value that will give the change. So that is deterministic. So in the deterministic phenomenon, whatever the measurement, whatever the study we want to know about that, it's given by a single value. It's given by a single value. That is a characteristic of the deterministic phenomenon. And if you talk about the probabilistic phenomenon, there is a classical example given. Isn't it? When we toss the coin, isn't it, even under identical condition, the outcome will not be the same. So it will be changing, head, tail, whatever it is, isn't it? It will have its own pattern. So in the probabilistic phenomenon, the special point is the individual measurements, what will happen, isn't it, in future, it cannot be predicted. When you toss the coin, we cannot predict, isn't it? Of course, in the volumetric analysis, we can predict what will be the value, isn't it? We know, if we know the, isn't it, the reaction and the content, everything, we can predict, isn't it? That can be verified experimentally with a single value. But in the probabilistic phenomena, we don't know what will be the value, isn't it? So it keep on changing and it cannot be predicted. But one important point is the relative frequency of occurrence of the individual values exhibit a recognizable pattern that is stable. That is stable for large number of observations. You please read the second para. That is the most important point related to statistics. And of course, the statistics evolved from that second point only. The discipline or the faculty of statistics evolved from the second point. That is, the relative frequency of occurrence of every value will have a stable pattern. And that is true over a large number of observations. The 2 points, isn't it? It will have a stable pattern and for large number of observations. If you want an example, this is a stable pattern. In the x-axis is the value of the random variable and the y-axis is the frequency of occurrence of each value. So if you conduct an experiment about a random variable, say in your case, if you want to consider the strength of a rod. So if you measure the strength of the rod in the x-axis, it may vary from minimum value, say 100 to 120 or 140. The strength of the rod may vary. And each value would have its own frequency, isn't it? This is a frequency distribution diagram, isn't it? And the frequency. And if the experiment is conducted for many number of times. In the sense, say, I would put it like this, say, so 1 lakh measurements. So that means 1 lakh specimen of the rod, and you break it and find the strength and draw this diagram. Means the frequency against the value of the random variable. It will give you a pattern. And the pattern is stable. So that's the important point. The stable means even if you repeat with another 1 lakh specimen, you will get the same pattern. Understand? So because of this occurrence of this stable pattern with any random variable, you may be knowing that it is the variable associated with the probabilistic phenomenon. A random variable is the one which is associated with the probabilistic phenomenon. I told you the two kind of phenomena. One is deterministic, another is probabilistic. And if you want to sum up the difference between the deterministic value and the probabilistic value or variable, if a deterministic variable can be explained by assigning a single value. Say atomic weight of the carbon, if you want, you can assign a single value 12, that's all. No other information is required. But in the case of a probabilistic variable, it cannot be defined by a single value. It requires a distribution. A distribution in the sense, the distribution of frequency against the value of the random variable. So this is a distribution. So understand, so deterministic variable, one single value, that's okay. And probabilistic variable or the random variable, we require a distribution. So I'm giving this kind of introduction to understand the importance of statistics and how it's different from the other kind of experimentation. So basic understanding is required so that when you conduct the experiment, you can do it in a proper way. With that in mind, I am explaining all the basic points. Understand? So probabilistic variable or the random variable requires a distribution. And I told you what is the distribution. Distribution is nothing but the frequency against the value of the random variable. And the pattern I showed here, isn't that? It's not same for all the variable. So strength might get one thing, isn't it? The density of the material may give a different kind of distribution. The temperature variation could be different. So every variable will have its own distribution. Another point. So the distribution I have shown is not universal. It's not applicable to all the random variable. One example I have shown here. Every random variable will have its own distribution. And this is the distribution we could obtain from experimentation. But more than that, we have standard distributions. All of you might have studied about that. This is a standard statistical distribution, a Poisson model. Isn't it? It's a binomial model, a normal model. So this is a normal model, and I have shown the diagram also, isn't it? You all are familiar with this, a normal model, the bill-shaped symmetric distribution. And these are the standard model. And to this standard model, we have to attach the variable we are studying. It's not limited to Poisson normal, isn't it? There are many exponential model, isn't it? Geometric model, variable model. There are many statistical standard models available. So I said two things. One is you could arrive at the distribution from conducting the experiments. When conducting the large number of experiments for a particular random variable, you can arrive at a distribution. Another thing is, you have a random variable in your hand, you can assume one of the standard distribution for the behavior of the random variable. You can assume. Instead of conducting all the experiments and finding out the distribution, you can attach one of the distribution to the random variable under consideration. Isn't it? So normally what we do, we won't conduct the experiments and get the pattern. Normally we won't do because it's very difficult. So any person interested in studying any behavior of any particular random variable, he will choose a particular distribution. He will choose a particular distribution and attach to that, and based on that, he will explain the behavior of the random variable. So the basic approach in statistics is actually selecting one particular model, statistical model is very, very important. So that's the aim of the statistical analysis, to construct a statistical model. Either it can be constructed or it can be adapted from the standard model available. So that's very, very important. If you have a random variable, as I said, that random variable requires a distribution. A deterministic variable, only one value is sufficient. So random variable, it requires a distribution. To start with any statistical analysis, you should know about the distribution of the random variable under consideration. Whatever the study you make, it's very, very important. And from the distribution you assume, you can derive any kind of conclusion about the behavior of the random variable. So the fundamental requirement is the distribution. So again, it is explained in the case of a diagram, isn't it? We want model, and from the model we can derive some conclusion. Okay, so this is all about the basis of statistics, how it is different, isn't it? And I just recap it. So two kinds of phenomena, probabilistic phenomena and the deterministic phenomena. Deterministic phenomena, it can be explained by one particular value, but in the case of a probabilistic phenomenon, isn't it? And along with that is a random variable, we require a distribution. So the distribution is a must to explain the behavior of the random variable. It's a fundamental point. Whatever the explanation I given so far revolves around that. The behavior of the random variable can be explained only by a distribution, because that only is stable. I told that only is stable. When it is stable, only we can use it, isn't it? And the value of the random variable, isn't it, cannot be predicted. When it cannot be predicted, isn't it, we cannot go about predicting the value of the random variable. What can be predicted is the frequency of occurrence. Again, I repeat, the value of the random variable cannot be predicted. Only the frequency of the occurrence can be predicted with a probability. The frequency of occurrence can be predicted by a probability. So now coming to the design of experiments. It's a different model. The model I have told so far is the distribution model, statistical distribution model, Poisson model and normal model, something like this. Here, we want to relate the input with the output. All of your studies would be around that, isn't it? We want to relate the input variable with the output response, isn't it? So we require a model. When we have a model, only we can predict, isn't it? All our research would be oriented towards predicting what will happen in future, isn't it? That's a fundamental requirement. So a model, it can be in the form of an equation. And the equation in the statistical phenomena, we call it as the regression equation. And the regression equation can be of any order. It can be a first order, second order, third order. The regression equation, y equal to function of x. Y is the response, x is the variable or the parameter you want to study. So the y is a function of x. What is a function of x? How it can be derived? So that's all about the design of experiment. Now coming to design of experiments, we require a model relating the input with the output. Y versus x. Y is the output, x is the input variable. So how you can arrive that, isn't it? When we do that, so again the same thing can be also told again. So what the purpose of constructing the model relating input to output is to estimate the effect of identified parameters on the response. We want to know how the input variable would affect the response. And also we can identify the most influential parameter. Most influential. There may be 3 or 4 parameters could influence the output. We want to know the most influential parameter. Of course, the third is optimization. When you know the influential parameter, we should know the optimum level, isn't it? Optimum level of each parameter that could maximize our output. So this would be the interest of our study, isn't it? When we want to relate the input versus output, these are the 3 things we are interested. One is the effect. How does it affect the response? Then we want to know the most influential parameters. That's very important, isn't it? Because with that we can control, monitor, and achieve the best results. And the third is the optimum level. So optimal level is the one which gives the most desirable output, isn't it? So these 3 things we can derive when we have this model. This model is connecting the input with the output. So I told the model in 2 different occasions, isn't it? One is the statistical distribution model, that is different. Here is the relating input versus output. For that purpose only, we have to conduct the experiment. How we can arrive that estimation, so it all depends upon the experiments we conduct. So again, it is reproduced. We have the random variable x, that is the input variable, and it is related to output. So one general representation, how the input is related to the output, in the form of a second order polynomial equation. General, very general. Again, whatever the example, I want to caution you, whatever the example I give you is not exclusive or inclusive of everything, nothing like that. It is some representation, some indicative example I am giving. There are vast number of other methods, representation available, and you have to refer the textbook. You have to study more on that. I am giving some examples so that you can understand the basic concepts involved. And this is the second order polynomial. You can have a third order also. We can have another kinds of equation, mathematical equation also. So in the second order, again you have to understand the coefficients expressed by beta. One is the constant, beta naught is the constant. And if you see, the beta I is a linear coefficient, beta I is a quadratic coefficient, and beta ij is the interactive coefficient. So you should know the effect among the variables you have chosen. Normally, we will study only the linear effect. Y equal to mx plus c, for a single variable, isn't it? We will study about the linear variable. But the effect need not be linear alone. It will not be linear always. It can be quadratic. Something like y equal to kx square is quadratic. And another third is the interactive. Beta ij. Beta ij is a interactive coefficient. It means what? The effect of one variable on the response. I repeat, please listen. The effect of one variable on the response depends upon the level of other variable. Depends upon the level of other variable. Say, the x1 affects the y, the response. To take an example, so it might cause a slow increase in the response when x2 level is lower. When x2 level is lower, the slope is very less. When the x2 level is higher, I repeat, x2 level is higher, if you see the effect of x1 on y, the slope may be steeper. If the slope is same irrespective of the value of x2, then there is no interaction between x1 and x2. Please understand, isn't it? So the interactive effect we fail to study actually generally, but it will be there and it has to be studied. It's all very relevant and important also. So you know the linear effect, you know the quadratic effect, but the interactive effect is the effect of one variable on the response depends upon the level of other variable. That means if the other variable is lower, it can be one trend. If the other variable is on the higher level, isn't it, the trend can be different. So that also has to be studied. So if you take three variables, x1, x2, x3, three variables, in the second order polynomial equation, how many coefficients would be there with this model? Three variable, x1, x2, x3, only three variable, second order, how many coefficients would be there? Any answer? Six. So what's the answer? One value. How many coefficients? Now my question is, I think 10 is correct, isn't it? There would be 10 coefficients. So I will explain. Listen, there will be 10 coefficients. How there will be 10 coefficients? One would be beta naught. One would be beta naught, isn't it? Beta 1, beta 2, beta 3, beta 1, 1 square, beta 2, 2 square, beta 3, 3 square, beta 1, 2, beta 1, 3, beta 2, 3. Isn't it? There will be 10 coefficients. In the second order polynomial, if it is the first order, it is different. If it is two variable, it will be different. So it's an example. It's not exhaustive. As I told that my examples are not exhaustive. And finally, isn't it? There is one epsilon. Isn't it? One epsilon. In the equation, you got to see that. Isn't it? That is the error. That is the error. That makes the difference between normal experiment and the statistical experiment. Now tell me that if it is a deterministic phenomenon, to explain the two kinds of phenomena I mentioned, isn't it? It is another way of giving explanation. In the case of deterministic phenomenon, what would be the equation? The epsilon would be absent. In the deterministic phenomenon, the epsilon would be absent. Only in the probabilistic phenomenon, the epsilon would be present. So since the epsilon, the error is present, we have to be careful in conducting the experiment. Otherwise, this kind of lecture interpretation are not necessary. When epsilon is absent, we need not explain anything about that. Isn't it? The epsilon is present. That makes our study difficult. Our result becomes less reliable. Again, our interpretation becomes, less reproducible. We cannot reproduce because the error is there. It's clear. So to make it more reliable, repeatable, reproducible, we have to be very, very careful. For that purpose, the epsilon error should be minimum. Isn't it? When it is minimum and the error is minimum, our prediction would be reliable. It's clear. So the whole purpose of conducting the design of experiment is, isn't it, mainly to reduce the error, epsilon. So the random error epsilon, what you have mentioned, is assumed to be, the mean is assumed to be 0. The mean of the random error is assumed to be 0. And the second point is, I mentioned about the beta. the coefficient. And to know about the effect of the variables on the response, what we require? We require the coefficients. We require the coefficient, isn't it? The value for the coefficient, isn't it? Beta naught may be 15.5, isn't it? Beta 1 is 1.6, isn't it? The value we require. The value of the coefficients are required. Then only the equation becomes complete. We can substitute the value of x1, x2, x3 and predict what will be the y. When we can do that? When we know the value of the coefficients. So again, the purpose of conducting the experiment is to find the value of beta, to find the value of beta with the minimum error, epsilon with the minimum value. Is clear? So I said that, isn't it? There is a random error and the value of beta are to be estimated. Here I use the word estimated. It means the value of beta cannot be determined. It cannot be determined. Because statistics, two important definitions. One is population, another is sample. Isn't it? So we are interested to know the behavior of the population. We want to know the behavior of the population. To the population, a random variable may be attached. So any random variable attached to the population, we want to know about that. So to know about that, what we do, we cannot study the whole population, not possible. There are many reasons for that, isn't it? Time consuming. Again, it would be more expensive. Sometimes if it is destructive, we cannot do that, isn't it? So many constraints in studying the whole population. Instead, what we do, we take a sample, what we call the random sample, isn't it? We pick the sample at different places, random sample. It is a representative of the population. It is only representative of the population. From the sample, we estimate the population parameter. Is clear? From the sample, we estimate the population parameter. So beta is belonging to the population. Beta belongs to the population. But what we study, we conduct some number of experiments, some 30, 40 experiments. And it's a sample. The 30, 40 experiments we conduct is a sample. From the sample, we estimate. Is clear? So we will not end up with the exact value of beta. Only some estimate, isn't it? It's not equal. Please understand. Estimate means the estimated value will not be equal to the actual value. So that's why I mentioned about the error now. There are two types of error. So there are two types of error. The equation, isn't it? I have mentioned about beta and finally end up with epsilon. So this epsilon should be minimum. So the epsilon is attached to the experimental error. When we conduct an experiment, there are a lot of sources for error, I will explain. And that error, we call it as experimental error. And the second is, I told you that the beta is estimated. It's not exactly determined. And there is also estimation error. So two types of error, experimental error and the estimation error. And in the experimental error, and this slide is the most important slide, I would say that in the whole lecture. Pure error and the error inflated by nuisance factors. So the epsilon, if it is left alone, it should be only pure error. Again, what is pure error? The pure error means we cannot control anything over that. We don't have any control. It's unknown, unseen, and it's naturally occurring. Because when we conduct experiments, there are a lot of unknown factors, isn't it? It may be a very small level would influence our response. You understand? So in a machine, the wear and tear, isn't it? It will keep on changing the temperature of the component, the slip between the gears, and so many things, which we cannot control normally. So those things would cause some error. We take it for granted, isn't it? We cannot make it zero. We cannot make it zero. When it is zero, it becomes deterministic. Is another question. Isn't it normal when we do that? Isn't it? There would be some error, uncontrollable and unknown actually. So that error we accept. Okay, but added to that, that's why I use the word inflated, is a nuisance factor. And that we have to reduce. Understand? The pure error, we don't have any control over that. So we assume that the mean is zero and we accept that. And the other errors caused by nuisance factors, we have to control. How much you control, so that will give you the prediction more and more perfect. That's why I told that this slide is very, very important in your experimentation. And the nuisance factors, again, there are controllable factors. Example, when you conduct experiments, you may use raw materials. Raw material means different batches of raw material. So raw material, the same raw material, but different batches. Isn't it? You will not get it on the same day, isn't it? Or from the same manufacturer or something like this. But say if it is a steel, this is the same steel, but different time from different sources. If it arrives that, isn't it? It will introduce some variable. Understand? Raw material obtained from different sources or a different point of time, that you use it for your experimentation. The batches of raw material you uses for the experimentation, it would introduce some variation. You clear? So that variation is caused by controllable in the sense you can control it, isn't it? We can confine it to a particular time or manufacturer or something like this. It's under your control. If you want, you can control. Please bear it in your mind, isn't it? When you use the raw material, when prepare or some raw material, some solution or something like this, you see that there is no variation in the batches. So if there is variation in the batches, there is a different way to avoid that. But we have to reduce it. That is called controllable. Another is caused by uncontrollable factors. Say when you make, say, a steel rod. I am giving an example of steel rod because it may be common to everyone. And while making it, the thickness of it may vary. Slightly, it may vary, isn't it? So you do one experiment, isn't it? You do another experiment. Between the experiments, there may be slight variation of the thickness of the rod you make, but you are not willingly making the difference, isn't it? It's uncontrollable. The machine, isn't it? That's all the maximum control it can provide, and it could cause a variation in the thickness. But thickness is not one of the variable of your study. If it is one of the variable of study, okay, it's not your variable of study. So that could cause variation in the response. And the third is the noise factors. Again, noise factor is naturally occurring variation, and it is also uncontrollable. To give an example, classical example is the temperature, the humidity. So at 9 o'clock, you do the experiments, the temperature and humidity may be one value, isn't it? 12 o'clock, if you do another experiments, the temperature and humidity may be different, isn't it? but that can also influence our response. Response you understand, isn't it? The output you are interested to study. That I use the word response. It could also influence. So you have to minimize these three errors caused by, overall we call it as the nuisance factors. The nuisance you have to reduce. The controllable factors, uncontrollable factors, I give an example, and the noise factors. How much care you take in your experimentation to avoid this value, isn't it, to eliminate this variation, so you will be successful. Finally, what the epsilon would be confined only to pure error. The epsilon in the equation will be confined to pure error when you eliminate the error caused by all these factors. It's clear? And of course, the estimation error is the sampling error. The sampling error is because I told you we estimate from the sample about the population. So there is some incompleteness of the data. The data is incomplete, not complete. When it is incomplete, definitely it will incur an error. Definitely, no doubt. I think you need not explain that. When the data is not complete, there would be definitely an error. So that is a sampling error. So this error also should be minimized. This error also should be minimized, and it can be minimized only by maximizing the sample size. Sample size. Number of tests we make. And again, there is a limit for that, isn't it? We cannot keep on increasing the sample size because time, money, everything is involved. So you have to arrive at an optimum level. It's clear? So the experimentation, whatever we embark on, should be designed in such a way that these errors are eliminated or minimized. Then what will happen? Your whatever the results you give would be reliable. Definitely it will be reliable and reproducible. Now, and till now whatever I explained, I think that's the most important thing any experimenter should take care of. So other things are of course available in the textbook. You can refer any statistical design, follow it and get the result. And while designing the experiments, conducting the experiments, you have to eliminate the error. That is the main focus. And of course, when we conduct the experiments, the minimum number of experiments we have to conduct should be equal to the number of coefficients in the equation. In the second order polynomial, there are 10 coefficients, isn't it? The minimum there should be 10 experiments. And the level should be minimum 2, isn't it? There should be minimum 2 levels of experiment. And while conducting the combination of experiment, there should be a full factorial experiment. Full factorial in the sense, isn't it? Any 2 level if you choose, all the combination of experimentation should be done. That is called the full factorial. So these are the 3 minimum requirements for the experiments. And again, the techniques involved is very important. The replication, randomization and blocking. So that requires some explanation. And replication is, you have to replicate the experiment. In any statistical experimental design, you might have noticed that at the same level, we will repeat the experiment. At the same level, we will repeat the experiment. So the replication is one of the requirements, one of the techniques required in the statistical experimental design. A must. Replication is because when we replicate, we will get different results. At the same level, we conduct the experiment and study the response, say string. And we repeat the experiment, replicate the experiments and conduct and test the product, and we will get the different value. Third time, if you repeat, fourth time, if you repeat, every time you will get different value, isn't it? Every time you will get a different value of the strength of the, say, steel rod you are measuring. It will not be the same. If it is same, it is deterministic. It's different, isn't it? So why it is different? Because of the epsilon, isn't it? There would be some random error involved. Even if you repeat under identical condition, you will get some difference. That difference is caused by the error, the random error. So to measure the random error, we have to conduct the replication. So in any experimental design, replication is must to find out the random error. And the randomization, again, if you have 15 or 16 experiments, you will not conduct them in a particular order. The order you choose should be random. The second experiment first, 13th experiment second, something like this. So again, it's because the error can be distributed to all the experiments. Otherwise, it would be biased. If you conduct with one variable one time, another variable another time, because of change in the environmental condition, the effect would be biased. So to avoid the biasness in the response, we have to randomize the experiments. You choose it at random and conduct the experiment so that it will avoid, as I mentioned here, caused by the noise factors or any bias it would present can be avoided. So that is very important, the randomization. And the third is the blocking. So the blocking is again necessary to avoid the effect caused by the nuisance factor. I told you nuisance factor, control, uncontrolled, something like this, isn't it? So if you have a raw material, so 3 types of raw material, you want to study the effect of some 3 variables using the 3 types of raw material. So if you have some experimental combination, you have to conduct all the experiments with all the 3 types of variable, all the 3 types of raw material. Raw material 1, you conduct all the 15 experiments. Raw material 2, again all the 15 experiments. And 3, again all the 15 experiments. The other way is conducting the first 5 experiments with one raw material, second 5 experiments with the second raw material, and third with the third raw material. So then what will happen? There would be bias, because raw material will influence. And first 5 would be biased by first raw material, and likewise the other experiment would be biased by the other raw material. To avoid that, you conduct all the 15 experiments with each raw material, so it would be uniformly present in all the experiments. The raw material effect would be uniformly present in all the experiments. And this is some of the experimental design I have given you. This is with respect to the variable x. And if you see that the first 4 experimental combination, and they are shown in the coded value. You may be aware of the coded value. -1 means lower, +1 means higher. That's all. It's a level, coded level. The first 4 is the full factorial. Full factorial means with the -1 and plus, so the 2 level, all the possible combination isn't with x1 and x2 are conducted. No other combination can be derived actually, isn't it? It's limited to only 4. So the 4 experimental combination is a full factorial, and added to that is extra components. And because this is required, because when you have 2 variables, there would be 6 coefficients. Minimum 6 experiment is required, isn't it? But full factorial is only 4. You have to add 2, but you cannot add 2 such like that. Isn't it? Minus alpha 0 plus alpha 0 means one variable x1 is taken to the higher level. But it has to be uniform. To make it uniform, we have to take the second level, second variable also to the other level, minus alpha plus alpha. So make it complete. No bias. So there should not be any bias in experimentation. And so 5, 6, 7, 8 is an extra 4 combination. And From 9 to 13, if you see that, it is replication. 9 to 13 is a replication. It is a unique in the experimental design. Normally, when anybody is asked to do experiments, they would not replicate. But in the statistical experimentation, replication is a must. It's a must. I told you this is required to estimate the random error. When we repeat, the values would be different. How much it makes a difference, that has to be estimated. Every experimentation would have different random error. So we have to conduct this kind of replication. And this is with respect to the three variables. And up to 8, it is full factorial. Up to 8 is a full factorial. And next, up to 14, if I say that up to 14, if you see that, another 6 experiments at different levels. We include minus alpha and plus alpha, and the alpha value we can arrive at what should be the alpha value. And from 15 to 20, if you see that, is all replication. Replication actually forms a major part of the experimentation. And replication is not repetition. Please understand. So when you have made a sample out of one experimental combination, say the 15, and you test it, okay, you get one response. With the same sample, you should not do the second test. That's not replication. Understand? You make a sample and tested, one response, one value is there, isn't it? And to get the second response value, you should not use the same sample. You have to reproduce the sample. Replicate right from the beginning. Like any other experiment, first and second experiments, you have to conduct it right from the beginning. So repetition is different from replication. So repetition will not help, isn't it? So that will give the variation only in the measurement. When the same sample, if you find the difference only in the measurement difference only, it will give. When you repeat only, isn't it right from the beginning, how the differences are introduced, only you can understand. So it's important with replication. Of course, when you conduct the experiment, you get the response, you have the experimental combination. Now you can use any software to get the coefficients. Now the equation becomes like this. Instead of beta, I use the letter B. B means estimate. It's estimate. It's not beta. Beta is the actual value. What the value we get is B. It's different from beta. Please bear in mind. The original equation is beta. But by doing experiments, we get approximate equation only. We get approximate, not the exact. So the B or the estimated. So again, now if you go into the statistics, the coefficients of the experiments can be tested by t-test. All of you know that, whether it is significant or insignificant. T-test, we can do that, significant, insignificant. So if you find that the test, the coefficient is insignificant, we can remove the coefficient. When it is significant, we can retain the coefficient. So the coefficients are retained and recalculated. And the final equation you get should be tested for goodness of it. So now what I going to cover is pure statistics, the t-test and other tests. So the t-test is used to find out the significance of the coefficients. Only the significant coefficients are retained. And the final equation containing only the significant coefficients, we have to test for the goodness of fit. Goodness of fit in the sense, what we predict and what actually we get, the difference would be minimum. That is the goodness of fit. So we finally, this is a point I told in the beginning itself. When we have finally arrived at an equation, when we use the equation for prediction, you understand, I use it for a prediction. I'm getting a value of 50, assume that. When you actually conduct the experiment, what would be the value? So if it is 52 or 51, it's okay. Instead, if it is 40, the equation is not good. So that goodness of fit should be tested. Whether your equation is reliable or not, it should be tested. For testing that only we have this kind of fitness of the model, and we use F-test. We use F-test, and I given the equation for the F-test, and conducting the F-test is we find out whether the effects are significant or not. Whatever the variables you have chosen should have significant effect on the response. So for that we will calculate the p-value. You know what is the p-value? And now everybody uses a p-value. Earlier people will be using the significant level, 5% significant, 10% significant level. Now nobody uses that significant value. Because of the advent of high-speed computing, now we can find out the p-value. P-value is the smallest level of significance. Instead of saying 5% significant, 10% significant, if you calculate the p-value, if you say that the p-value is 1%, that is the significance level. If p-value is 15%, what we get? 15% means 0.15, the value. 0.15, I tell it in terms of percentage. If it is 15%, that is the significance level. So instead of fixing the significance level, we straight away calculate the significance level. From the F value arrived, calculated, we can get the p-value. P-value is nothing but the significance level. So when you want to make a correct decision, the p-value should be smaller. When you want to make the correct decision, the p-value should be smaller. Because I said that the significance level is nothing but the error, the type 1 error. If you are aware, it is type 1 error. So we want to reduce the error, the type 1 error, so the p-value should be lower. And another way is, a common way is R squared. Everybody would be using R squared, isn't it? Any regression equation, we will report this R squared. So this R squared is, just I'll explain the basic, the sum of square of the model divided by the sum of square of total. So R squared, if it is 0.9, R square is 0.9. What does it mean? If R squared is 0.9, what does it mean? 90% of the variation in the response. Please listen. 90% of the variation in the response are explained by the parameters we have chosen. We have chosen x1, x2, x3, 3 parameters. So these 3 parameters can explain 90% of the changes that will happen in the response. That's why the sum of square of the model, what you have finally arrived at, can explain 90% of the change in the response. 90% of the change in the response. The remaining 10% not explained. Understand? Remaining 10% not explained. That's the error. That's the error. It's clear. So the R square is also very, very important. While doing the calculation, you have to understand the meaning of the R square, and now people talk about adjusted R square and predicted R square. So because of the computers available, we can do that. Adjusted R square also and predicted R square also. So the predicted R square is more reliable than adjusted R square. Adjusted R square is more reliable than the normal R square. Adjusted R square means we use the number of coefficients we have arrived at. In calculating the adjusted R square, the number of coefficients we use in the equations are taken into account. That's the reason. So the adjusted R square value will be generally lower than the ordinary R square. Adjusted R square value will be definitely, because if you keep on increasing the coefficients, definitely your prediction will be more correct. But the effectiveness is very less because you use more number of parameters to predict the response. With the less number of variables, if you could predict the response, that is always better. That is expressed by adjusted R square. Less number of variables gives a better prediction, means the adjusted R square value would be higher. And predicted R square is how the prediction. So I will explain what is the predicted R square. If you have 15 experiments, so what the computer will do is it will take only the 14 experiments. It will take only the 14 experiments. From the 14 experiments, it will arrive at the equation. It will arrive at the equation. And this equation will be used to predict the 15th response. Understand? 14 experiments used to arrive at the equation, and this equation will predict the 15th response. And the difference is important, isn't it? That should be minimum, really, isn't it? Because the difference between the actual and the predicted should be as less as possible, and that is expressed by the predicted R square. Please try to use this predicted R square to make your prediction more and more reliable. So I started with that point, isn't it? Your results should be reliable. Then only people will accept that. And when you conduct the experiments again and again, you will come with the same result. It should not be a different one. The industry people also will come to you, accept your results, and then they will apply it. Now there is a gap because of the difference in them or lack of reliability. So my stress is improve your reliability in terms of the prediction by conducting the experiments in the proper way, because there are error involved, isn't it? I told you in one of the slides, and I mentioned that that's an important slide, because there are errors involved in the experimentation. We should not ignore it. We should take it into account and earnestly try, earnestly we have to try to reduce the error. It is very, very difficult. Normally, it's very difficult for a research scholar, but then only your conclusion or contribution will be well respected. We want recognition for our whole effort, isn't it? We are doing it for 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, and that effort should not go waste, should not remain in the books alone. It should be useful to the industry. When it will be useful, definitely when you reduce the error, for that you require a lot of effort. It's not the easy way, but you have to understand first where you can go wrong. Without understanding, you cannot correct it. So that's why my whole effort here isn't it, to make you understand where you can go wrong. So you be aware of that and reduce the error, make your output more meaningful, reliable. And of course, the other is an explanation. And these are the expression, isn't it? You know all about the contour map, and these are the contour map. I need not explain actually. And this is a three-dimensional effort. And optimization also, when you have the equation, you know that, isn't it? When we partially differentiate with respect to the variable under consideration, you will end up with either maxima or minima or minimax. All three possibles could come. And a point of maximum, point of minimum or minimax. And by differentiating the equation, you can get that. This is the minimax example I have given. Of course, that is about the process control that you may not be very much interested right now when you join the industry. So all of you will be a consultant to the industry, or you have to work for the industry, work in the industry. That should be the final aim. So because that way only you can serve the country. So when you join the industry, you should know about how to implement your result. You have the result. Implementing the result is totally different. So it's also, there are many control is required, process control is required. So that you should do that. So I think with those explanations, I conclude my lecture. Thank you for your patient hearing. Again, the audience is mixed. I don't know the background of the audience. How relevant to you for your PhD work, this kind of experimentation. All need not carry out this kind of experimentation. Somebody will do some other theoretical work. Those who are doing the experimentation only, it is essential.
Thank you so much, Professor. Participants, if you have any queries, you can directly interact with Professor because no, these things you can directly apply in your research. Whatever the experiments you do, you can directly apply and get it done. Any questions to Professor? You can apply to your research and then you can ask the question.
Anyhow, as I mentioned, I am Professor Eminence in the textile department. I'm available in the department. I'm not an outsider. And now I'm insider. So any point of time, if you want to have any more clarification, if you are interested, I'm available to you, approachable. So because that will help if you have any specific queries with respect to your problem. I used to do that for AC Tech. Normally, AC Tech, we have chemical engineering department is a big department. They carry out a lot of experimentation. So chemical engineering research scholars used to come to me for a discussion. So similarly, you are welcome.
So myself, Kevin, a research scholar from Department of Geology. So my question is, sir, when you mentioned about the R square value is 0.9, this 90% the value is like true or something. And up until what value we can take the values are more reliable, sir? Is my question clear?
So this is with respect to R squared, isn't it? So I told you about the meaning of R squared, isn't it? If it is 0.9, your model, isn't it? The model, you understand what is the model we have finally arrived at, isn't it? The second order, first order, whatever it is. That can explain the changes in the response. Response means in the, whatever the property you study. All of you, I think right from the beginning I used the word response. Response is the property you study finally, isn't it? The property you study, when you change a variable, there will be changes in the response. Understand? Changes the level of the variable. Changes the level of the variable. There will be changes in the response. So this changes is accounted 90% by the variables you have chosen. Remaining 10% is unaccounted. So you have to reduce it as much as possible. So 90% reliability is there in your prediction. Understand? 90% reliability is there. When you give a value of some say 15 or 16, it is not exactly 15 or 16. It can 90% percent of the time it may be different value.
So up until what percentage we can like trust that value, sir? And when the value is like, let's say like it's like 0.6 or 0.5, we have to repeat, sir.
If you want to increase that, from the beginning I told you that you have to minimize the error. It's clear? Please sit down. Another important point is when you do experiments, I told you isn't it some 13 experiments or 15 experiments or 20 experiments. When we conduct the experiments, the experimental procedure or the experimentation should be homogeneous. Understand my point? Homogeneous. It should be same. The conditions should be same for all the experiments. That means you have to change the level of the variable under consideration only. From one experiment to another experiment, what should be the only change? Only the level of the variable. Level of the variable. Temperature, if you want to study from 50 degree to 60 degree you change, means only the temperature alone should be increased from 50 degree to 60 degree. All other conditions, environmental, ambience should be same. Then only you can find out the effect of temperature alone. When you change the temperature, if something else also change, isn't it? It would be marred, blurred. The effect of temperature will be blurred with the changes taking place in other conditions. So it has to be homogeneous. If you make the experimental condition homogeneous throughout your experimentation, the error would be reduced. This is another way of explaining how to reduce the error. I told you many things, isn't it? You make it homogeneous, simple terminology use, then the error would be reduced. Okay, this is one thing. The second thing is you have to include more variable into account. If you use only two variable, there may be some other variable which are very relevant, for your study, that also you have to include. So just simply by including more number of variables, you can increase the predictability, the perfection in predictability, or we can reduce the error. But not for that purpose alone, we should not include the variables, because it will make the experimentation more and more complicated, more and more expensive. So you have to choose that. Again, since you asked that question, I want to give you some idea for our research scholars. There are some screening techniques, statistical techniques. Screening technique means if you suspect that there are 10 variables that could influence the response, 10 variables that could influence the response, you carry out the screening test, particularly Placard-Burman. There is a study, Placard, Plackt, Placard and Burman. There is a method, like the Box and Hunter method, Placard and Burman method. You apply all the 10 variables, but the experiment will not be exhaustive. It will be limited to less number of experimentation, and it will tell you among the 10 what are the most significant variable. You may reduce it to 4 or 3. So those variable, if you consider for your experimentation, then the prediction may improve. So this is also essential. Particularly geology, I would say that there are many number of variables. It would be many number of variables. So first you do the screening. Screening means statistically. Then apply. Definitely the prediction would improve. So predictability isn't it should suffer less error. That's the whole crux of my discussion. The error should be minimum, and that's possible when we do it properly, when you do the experimentation properly. And whatever I told you is not complete. As I told you, is not exhaustive, isn't it? There is some introduction about how to carry out the experimentation. There are many advanced level books are available. Before you use your app or software, you study those textbooks. Very important. I referred some textbooks, and you also read the textbooks in depth. So any statistic textbook, if you go, isn't it, you may see a lot of tables, isn't it, lot of variables, and many number of equation. It may be boring sometimes, but you have to overcome the inertia, and once you go and understand, then it will be definitely interesting. Statistics is more complicated, and to reduce the complication, you have to take the right path. You should not take the available path. Normally what we do is, whatever it is available, you take it and somehow finish. I know the constraint, because I was a research scholar, I told you, isn't it? I'm in the same university. So I know the constraint involved, but putting more effort will you improve your results. So when I was a research scholar in the AC Tech, I used the CEG library to the maximum extent, our CEG library. So all the Box and Hunter and the original paper published in 1957, I actually used to read, available in our CEG library. And across the road, IIT library also, I was the member. I go and read a lot of books. So reading will only improve your knowledge, and that will make your results more reliable. Again, that's the final point. Your results should be reliable.
Thank you so much, Professor, for the detailed explanation. Any other queries from the participants? Okay, so Professor, with your permission, can we conclude this lecture?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'll come there.
So, I take this privilege to extend the vote of thanks. Foremost, on the behalf of the university, I extend my sincere thanks to the chief guest, Dr. A. Peer Mohamed for accepting the invitation to deliver the talk on this important topic. Our sincere thanks to the Honorable VC for initiating this lecture, and special appreciations to our Director Madam, Dr. C. Umarani, for her sincere efforts in executing this program. My appreciations and thanks to the supportive audience, and I believe you would have got benefited by this lecture. I also extend my sincere thanks to the CFR team for all the arrangements for the successful conduct of this event. Thank you all. So the refreshments have been arranged outside this hall. Please join for the refreshments. Thank you.